Hello everyone and welcome back to Alf Time. I'm your host Alf, and you may have noticed that we talk about Nintendo quite a bit here. Like, almost exclusively. That's all well and good, but Nintendo has so darn many consoles to choose from. I can't keep track of all these things. I need to know which ones are good and which ones to get rid of. As such, today we're going to be ranking every Nintendo console. Here's the tricky part though. Don't tell anyone, but there actually isn't a correct way to determine which consoles are the best. Your favorite console is probably whichever one you grew up with, and it's the same for me. I'll always love the Wii, Wii U, and DS to an irrational degree, but maybe you guys don't care about that. Hence, I'm gonna try to be a little more objective today. I'll be attempting to rank Nintendo consoles based on the quality of hardware itself, along with the number of amazing games they each have to play. This means that sales figures and my personal bias will hopefully stay out of this video. I'm not taking graphics or age into account per se, but these games do need to be playable and fun by modern standards for me to call them good. A quick note, I'm not counting console redesigns here. If you play all the same games as another console, you don't count as a new one. So the Game Boy Advance is different from the Game Boy, but the new 3DS is the same as the regular 3DS for the sake of this video. Also, the Switch will be the newest console I rank here. Without further ado, let's get started. Really quick, I'm gonna get all the super old or weird consoles out of the way. The Virtual Boy is obviously terrible, so that's going straight into F tier. The Game & Watch whatever isn't really a console in the traditional sense of the word, but that's also going in F. Finally, I'm gonna ruffle some feathers here, but the Game Boy is also going in F tier. I know it was the best people had back in the 80s and it's super historically significant, but you can't tell me this is the peak of gaming. For the same reasons, I'm throwing the NES and Game Boy Color in D tier. There was a little more to appreciate here, especially games like Super Mario Bros. 3 and the new Pokemon generations, but that's about it. The vast majority of games on every system I've mentioned so far are borderline unplayable in 2024. Go cry about it, let's move on. First up, going chronologically from here on out, we've got the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES. This bad boy is a classic for a reason, and it was totally groundbreaking for its time. The hardware is as robust as classic Nintendo gets. Nice controller, and all-around good build quality. This thing will last you for a very long time, and plenty of SNES games are totally playable and fun even now. Super Mario World, the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, Mario RPG, A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, these are all solid games even by modern standards. Unfortunately, plenty of games on this system still feel super outdated. The SNES originated series like Mario Kart and Star Fox, but the hardware was clearly not there yet. I respect the ambition, but not all these games are fun by modern standards. I don't diss them just because they're old, but because they're bad. For the 2020s, I've gotta go with B tier. Plenty of great games, but still a lot left to be desired. Next, let's talk about the Nintendo 64. This bad boy was the first true 3D gaming console, and boy does it show. Nintendo clearly had no idea what they were doing with this controller, practically inventing the analog stick. These prongs and C buttons don't make any sense, but at least it's all durable. Except the plastic stick box. More important are the games, and this is where things really start to pick up. Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, the first Smash Bros, these are all classics. However, I'm gonna cautiously call into question how many genuinely good video games are on the Nintendo 64. I think Mario is fun to speedrun, and the Zelda games are certainly puzzly pieces of history, but how much of this stuff is seriously good? Donkey Kong 64? Yoshi's Story? I have some N64 nostalgia, but I feel like there's honestly not a ton of great stuff here. The Super Nintendo marked the golden age of 2D gaming, while the N64 represented the poopy diaper phase of 3D gaming. Still significant, still cool to experience from time to time, but I've gotta go with C tier for this one. I'm sorry. Moving on to 2001, we've got a big year for Nintendo systems. First up, there's the Game Boy Advance, aka the peak of 2D handheld gaming. There are lots of great GBA games, but the library was honestly carried by remakes of SNES games and whatnot. That's not to say this little guy didn't have good original stuff, because it absolutely did. The Minish Cap, Mario and Luigi, Pokemon, and plenty more. I'm certainly not gonna complain about all the best Super Nintendo games being along for the ride. Backwards compatibility with the Game Boy was also a nice touch. The hardware is also incredibly solid, which is the case for pretty much all of these consoles up until the 2010s. Overall, the GBA was a great system. It's basically a little SNES that you can put in your pocket, and that's pretty cool. I'm putting it in B tier just above the Super Nintendo. Also from 2001, we've got the GameCube. I'd say this might be the ultimate fan favorite Nintendo console, and I totally get that. This is the first great modern controller Nintendo ever made, and it's also where 3D games finally started to feel really good. It's not about the graphics, this stuff is just so much more playable than N64 games. And games absolutely abound with this one. Mario Sunshine, Wind Waker, Melee, Pikmin, Luigi's Mansion, Thousand Year Door, F-Zero GX, Animal Crossing, Metroid Prime, and so many more. The list goes on, and they're almost all fun even to this day. I really don't want to slander old video games, of course they're important, but this is really fun no matter who you are. The GameCube's reputation speaks for itself. The hardware wasn't perfect, and the small discs kinda hurt its ability to get third-party games, but I don't care. This is phenomenal. Easy S tier from me. Moving on to the stuff that came out during my lifetime, we've got the Nintendo DS. This was the birth of dual-screen play and touchscreens, which kinda marked a turning point for Nintendo. For the next decade, it seems like Nintendo went on this kick of incorporating gimmicks into their systems. Some DS games made really obnoxious use of the touchscreen, but that's a small issue here. Above all else, the Nintendo DS had a ton of really fun games. Good New Super Mario Bros., a bunch of Pokemon, Mario and Luigi, 2 Zelda games, Mario Party, Mario Kart, there was really a lot to play here. Some games tried to be wacky or different by making ugly use of 3D graphics and stuff, but I really don't mind too much. The DS was very, very good, so I'm putting it in A tier. Entering the golden age of Nintendo's gimmick consoles, we got the Nintendo Wii. This thing was a cultural juggernaut, but often for underwhelming reasons. The simple novelty of motion-controlled gaming drew lots of people in, but that's not viewed so fondly these days. Certain things like the spin move in Super Mario Galaxy were mapped to a Wii Remote shake for seemingly no reason, and plenty of other games were tainted by shoehorned motion controls. All this stuff actively made Wii games less future-proof, but there are still tons of great titles on the system. Mario Galaxy, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Brawl, the Prime Trilogy, and plenty more. It certainly isn't the avalanche of content that we got with the GameCube, but at least it's backwards compatible with all those games. Well, most versions of the Wii are. Overall, I still think this is a really solid console. Not perfect, but a very high B tier from me. Moving on to Nintendo's most forgettable system, we have the 3DS. That shade from me was totally uncalled for because the 3DS was a pretty good little handheld. In terms of what it could do, it was basically just a more capable DS. Its circle pad and better hardware made it much more capable of supporting 3D gaming. This is not to be confused with the 3D screen, which ultimately ended up amounting to nothing. Most importantly though, games abound with the 3DS. Mario, Smash Bros., Link Between Worlds, Pokemon, Samus Returns, Luigi's Mansion, Kid Icarus, and as you may have guessed by now, many, many more. It's looking more and more like the 3DS will mark the end of true handheld gaming, and I think this system earned that. I'm putting it in A tier. Now we've got the awkward cousin of the Nintendo console family, the Wii U. This was hopefully the last installment in Nintendo's line of, wait, which kind of games does this system play? Consoles, and it also happens to be my personal favorite ever. That's obviously a hot take, because looking at it objectively, the Wii U was lacking, to say the least. The gamepad was really unique and useful in certain games, but I think most people were just confused and put off by it. And it was so expensive that basically every multiplayer game just used one gamepad and a bunch of Wii remotes. A console where half of the games are partially built around the weirdly specific controller from your last system is gonna be a bit clunky. Of course, the most important thing about any console is its games, and there's some really good stuff here. Splatoon, Mario Maker, Tropical Freeze, the HD Zelda remakes, and at least a few more. That's kind of the thing about Wii U games. There were probably 3 Wii U games that every fan was genuinely into, and the rest were so divisive. I adore games like Pikmin 3 and Nintendo Land, but most people probably think they're just alright. This also marked a period of Nintendo's history where they just could not seem to give fans what they actually wanted. The worst Star Fox, the worst Mario Party, the worst Animal Crossing, there were just so many misses on the Wii U. I still think this console had a lot going for it, and I love it to pieces, but I kinda have to put it in the same boat as the N64. Viewed very fondly by those who grew up with it, but how many genuinely good games are there? Just a few. It hurts my soul, but I've gotta put the Wii U in C tier. Comment your favorite niche Wii U game though, give it some love. And finally, we've got the Nintendo Switch. Obviously the Switch hasn't been replaced quite yet, but I think we get the idea. I really don't want to let recency bias affect my opinion of the Switch, but it's so good. Soon after launch, Nintendo had flooded this thing with some all-time great games. Breath of the Wild, Super Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, and tons of smaller games to fill in those gaps. Over the years, we got the best Smash, the best Mario Maker, the other best Zelda, and so many other great games and re-releases. No matter who you are, I guarantee that there are dozens of Nintendo Switch games that you would love to play for hours and hours and hours. However, this is the first really serious instance where the hardware itself could affect the ranking of a console for me. Joy-Con drift is real, along with the general vibe of this just not being a super durable piece of Nintendo technology. It's flawed, but so is everything. There are too many games for the Switch to not be incredible. Call me a loser, but I've gotta put the Switch in S tier. Below the GameCube though, just for the tech issues. And there's my list. You've been on YouTube before, you don't need me to tell you how to leave a comment about what I said. Have a good day.